Vladimir Putin and his Kremlin cronies thought they had the winning strategy for the Ukraine war. Over the winter, continuous destruction of Ukraine's energy infrastructure would be the key. With drones and missiles combining to plunge Ukraine's people into freezing cold darkness, Russia had to know that Ukraine wouldn't take this lying down. And in January, Russia crossed the line by hitting Kyiv hard. Ukraine's answer came during the night of January 25th, and it was brutal and devastating. Russia's airstrikes have been growing more intense over the past couple of weeks. Following a January 9th attack against Ukraine's energy grid, the Kremlin even outlined its callous plan: apply pressure to Ukraine to force it to come to the table. As the missiles flew and drones buzzed, Putin's favorite mouthpiece, Dmitry Peskov, echoed his boss's thoughts, claiming the situation is deteriorating day by day for the Kyiv regime before stating that Ukraine's corridor for decision-making is narrowing. Translation: Russia will keep hitting the energy grid, and Ukraine will have to negotiate if it doesn't want its people to freak. Fast forward to January 20th, and Russia followed up on its January 9th strike against Ukraine's energy infrastructure with yet another reported on by the new voice of Ukraine. This strike was one of Russia's largest, yet Kyiv itself was attacked with ballistic missiles which caused massive and ear-splitting explosions to ring through the city. At least one fire broke out, and disruption to the city's water and electricity supply was reported on Kyiv's left bank. By the time the Russian onslaught was done, Ukraine counted 18 ballistic missiles, 15 cruise missiles, Akon missile, and 339 attack drones. Among the projectiles that Russia sent flying, Russia's blunt force strike was successful, though nowhere near as successful as it could have been, as you'll discover if you watch our video. Ukraine did an amazing job of ensuring that the vast majority of Russia's missiles and drones didn't hit their targets on January 20th. Some did, of course, but most of the potential damage was mitigated. Not that this would quell Ukraine's anger. Revenge had to come, and it would be brutal. So keep watching to find out what Ukraine did in response. Russia is still far from done. On January 24th, it struck again. Just hours after Ukrainian, Russian, and U.S. diplomats met in Abu Dhabi to see if they could hash out anything resembling a ceasefire agreement, Russia proved that every claim that it makes to want peace, absolute nonsense. Yet more missiles and drones rained down in Ukraine as air defense sirens bled. Explosions rocked Kyiv once more, leading one European diplomat to claim that Moscow is sending a message written in fire. This is how Putin negotiates, not with words or legitimate promises, but with more death as he tries to grind down his enemy. The latest in a series of strikes has left Kyiv in a dilemma. As the Kyiv Post reported on January 25th, the January 24th strike alone cut the heating to 6,000 of the city's buildings, along with sapping electricity from 88,000 households. Emergency workers are being run ragged every night trying to restore power to as many people as possible. However, there's no denying that the first part of the Russian strategy is working. The Kremlin's missiles and drones are indeed cutting heating and power en masse. What isn't working out for Putin is the breaking of the Ukrainian will that he expected to come as a result. The sad truth for Ukraine is that these energy infrastructure strikes may also be the result of the country's past as a Soviet state. However, unwilling the Ukrainian people may have been to fall under the Soviet yoke, especially toward the end of the Union. The BBC says that it is likely Soviet urban planning that is contributing to making Russia's winter strategy so successful. The widespread prevalence of apartment blocks that rely on communal central heating in Kyiv is a major problem. This extremely Soviet structure sees water being heated up off-site before it's pumped into the radiators of thousands of homes. Russia attacking the plants where this heating is happening is an easy way to steal the warmth from Kyiv's citizens. Generators and battery packs can provide temporary solutions when electricity is cut, the BBC reports. But attacks on heating plants are a much bigger problem. Fear, then, is what Putin intends to spread in Ukraine. Russia has spent the last 2 weeks bombarding Kyiv and other cities with terroristic attacks that serve no military purpose. It isn't Ukraine's soldiers who are being hurt by any of this. They're on the front lines, not in the homes that are losing access to power and heat. It's Ukraine's civilians who are being hurt, the old and infirm, the children, those who aren't fighting for their country and simply wish to survive. The cruelty that Russia brings are those who are being brutalized in ways that should never be happening. And also that Putin can force Ukraine to the negotiating table so that it can make maximalist demands that it knows Ukraine won't and shouldn't accept yet. As is often the case, Putin has underestimated the Ukrainian people, as Valentina Kerr, who is deputy director to whom The Guardian spoke on January 13th, puts it. I think the Russians want to break us. There is nothing to be done, so we need to survive these kinds of problems. They want to make Ukrainians angry and unhappy. They think this will make us go out into the streets and protest, but that won't happen. Putin should be listening to people like TKA. He should also have been listening back in September when Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky delivered a stark warning as his country anticipated. Russia's ramping up of its energy grid strikes. If they threaten a blackout, for example, in Ukraine's capital, the Kremlin should know that there'll be a blackout in Russia's capital. Zelensky roared at the time before adding, Russia must clearly understand that civilized countries differ from wild ones and that they never start first and are not aggressive, but that doesn't mean they're weak. Russia found out how strong Ukraine is and how devastating its retaliation can be just a day after its latest strike. As you'll see in a moment, Putin clearly hasn't taken Zelensky. He's warning seriously, overconfident, or perhaps calloused to the suffering of his own people. Putin keeps ordering more and more. On January 20th, the Kremlin harshened its rhetoric and escalated its actions. Reuters reported that the Russia strike conducted that night targeted substations that are critical for nuclear safety, which represents an escalation that suggests Russia no longer cares about causing catastrophe on the streets of Ukraine. That same January 20th strike also involved the use of missiles and drones collectively valued at $131 million, demonstrating our Putin has lost sight of his country's financial woes, spending over $130 million on a single strike at a time when Russia's budget deficit is $70 billion per the main director of intelligence in Ukraine isn't a smart move. Putin is already hurting his people. And a day after the January 24th attack, Ukraine repaid Russia's actions in kind with swift retaliatory strikes. But before we go deeper into that, you are watching the military show. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time to do it. We publish daily videos covering subjects including Ukraine's latest long-range attacks against Russia. This latest attack was a doozy. The target was Belgorod. The Oblasts is one of Russia's closest to Ukraine as it shares borders with Putin's enemy and has been used as a staging ground for Russia's ground and aerial assaults since the moment that the supposed special military operation began back in February 2022. Putin and his Kremlin cronies would have thought that Russia didn't need to worry about the people of Belgorod. Ukraine couldn't strike back. The Russian logic went at the time. It didn't matter that the oblast contains power plants, key military sites, and hundreds of thousands of people. Ukraine would be finished before it could ever bring any semblance of the war that Putin started back to the Russian people. 4 years later, we can see how wrong they were. And on January 25th, Ukraine put the exclamation point on Putin's arrogant stupidity with an aerial attack that authorities in Belgorod are describing as the most massive that the region, along with the city that shares the region's name, has experienced to date in the war. In what the Kyiv Post describes as a tit-for-tat energy strike, Ukraine appears to have used HIMARS weapons to cause a series of at least 50 explosions that have left many in Garrod without access to power and water. What's good for the goose is good for the gander, and in this case, the biggest gander that Ukraine targeted was the Gerod Thermal Power Plant, or TPP. That plant, which Melania says, is located on PVI. Donka Street was struck multiple times with munitions, likely discharged from HIMARS, multiple rocket launches. Russia's air defenses could do nothing to stop Ukraine's aerial assault, and the TPP became the most prominent victim. There are plenty of reasons why Ukraine attacked this target too. Echoing Zelensky's words from September, albeit not with an attack on Russia's capital, Ukraine struck a plant that is responsible for providing thermal energy to Ross Central and Northern districts. That translates into a plant that provides heating to more than 36% of Belgorod's total heating needs. That means that Ukraine's latest strike put roughly around 115,000 people in Belgo at risk of losing their access to heating. Gander meet goose. It hits just as hard as you do, though. Russia often attempts to downplay the success of Ukraine's strike. There was no chance that it would be able to pull off that old trick this time around. Russian Telegram channels, including the pro-Ukrainian channel. Astra quickly began sharing footage of the outcome of a night that had reminded Putin that Russia isn't the only nation that has dangerous long-range weapons, commenting in a post in which it shared several videos of Ukraine's attack. Astra said several strikes again hit the Belgorod thermal power plant. Several districts experienced power outages not only with electricity, but also with water supplies. Monitoring channels report that this attack was one of the most powerful. At least 50 explosions were counted in the city, according to local public groups. The video shows several aspects of the attack. In one, we see what appears to be a Russian service member, perhaps part of the country's border or National Guard, showing some of the debris from one of the missiles that struck Belgorod on January 25th. Another video highlights the sounds of several explosions as car alarms blare with yet another, showcasing a massive flash in the sky that was likely one of Ukraine's HIMARS scoring, a direct hit against the Belga or TPP. The evidence was out there almost as soon as Ukraine struck. Russia couldn't do a thing to cover it up. So instead, the Belgorod authorities switched into a strange combination of panic and victim-blaming mode. Acknowledging that Ukraine had indeed scored direct hits on some of Belgorod's most important energy facilities. It was the Belgorod regional governor Vila Ov, who claimed that what his oblast had just experienced was the most massive strike on Belgorod yet seen during the war. No casualties had been reported, which just goes to show how Ukraine has mastered the art of the precision strike, as it never hits civilians willingly. But GLA Cove claims that a utility outbuilding has caught fire, and Russia's old reliable excuse was brought out yet again. There is damage to energy facilities. We are currently gathering information. Emergency crews and emergency services have responded to the scene. KO said before making a claim that we have heard all too often when Ukraine launches successful long-range attacks. As a result of the shelling, an outbuilding caught fire. Emergency services are working to extinguish the fire. Falling debris caused a fire in one of the city's courtyards. We've said it before and we'll say it again. Ukraine must have the world's most accurate drone debris. GLA Cove later delivered another statement, where he revealed that the damage that Ukraine's strike did was worse than he initially claimed. Homes, vehicles, and infrastructure were all hit. The regional governor claimed, and Ukraine's missiles targeted far more than the Belgar TVP. Several of the Belgorod region settlements, including Borisov, Valky, Ovis, Gran, and Kresly-Ask, were hit, and some areas were left without gas. That alone tells you that Ukraine was successful at hitting the precise target that it wanted to hit. Regions are without gas because the Belgar TPP is burning. You might think that Ukraine will be waiting in the wings to rub this attack in Putin's face. After all, revenge is pretty sweet when the person against whom it's committed is actively trying to destroy your country. However, Ukraine hasn't commented on the January 25th Belgorod strike yet, perhaps preferring to let the strike itself do the talking. If Russia proved on January 24th that peace negotiations are pointless, Ukraine has shown itself willing to force peace through force of its own. The only thing we know about the strike with any degree of certainty outside of what Ukraine has hit is that Ukraine appears to have used HIMARS to attack Belron. Russia's authorities have said as much, and the use of this weapon shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody who's been following the war. Belgorod, being a border region, is well within the range of HIMARS, especially if Ukraine uses the Block 1, a missiles available for HIMARS. Those missiles can travel up to 300 kilometers, or about 186 miles, and they release a payload of 300 bomblets via a single burst warhead. HIMARS can also be used to launch attacks missiles if that type of missile is the one that Ukraine used on January 25th. Then we also have indirect confirmation that the US must have approved this latest strike on Russian territory. The US had created an approval mechanism in the spring of 2025 that saw Ukraine's use of attack HIMARS limited severely. However, a November strike using the missile suggested that permission was back on the table, and it's possible that the US said yes once again on January 25th. We don't know for sure unless Ukraine reveals the answers, and we have a final addendum to a night that has seen Russia get battered in response to its constant attacks on Ukraine's energy grid in the wake of Ukraine's January strike. The Russian news agency TASS carried comments from Russia's defense ministry. Though how seriously these claims can be taken is anybody's guess. After all, TASS also reports that Russia's defense ministry claims that it had destroyed 670 Ukrainian aircraft and 283 of the country's helicopters since the Ukraine war began. Ukraine only had 116 fighter jets before Putin launched his invasion, and it hasn't received over 550 more since the cynics among you might claim that Russia is over-exaggerating its numbers a little bit here. It also seems a bit coincidental that Russia is suddenly claiming to be inflicting about as many daily casualties against Ukraine as it is experiencing itself. Spurious claims of military success aside, Ukraine's Belgorod attack wasn't just about revenge or taking out one of the region's thermal power plants for that matter. As News Sky pointed out back in October, every time Ukraine hits Belgorod, it sends a very powerful message to the Kremlin. The outlet cites Belgorod as the Achilles heel of the Russian Federation due to its sharing a 40-kilometer or 24.8-mile border with Ukraine. Equipment deliveries and troop rotations into the Ukrainian regions of Luhansk and Kyiv all pass through Belgorod, which makes it one of Russia's most important logistical hubs for supplies, soldiers, and even the electricity that's used on the Ukraine war front lines. Traditionally, a region like Belgorod wouldn't be considered part of Russia's deep rear, simply because it's inside Russia itself. However, Belgorod's status as a border of blast means that it's far too close to Ukraine for Putin's comfort, especially now that Ukraine has missiles and drones that can easily travel practically anywhere in the OB blasts. So a strike on Belgorod will almost always involve the destruction of legitimate military targets. But as importantly, at least for Ukraine, such strikes are also shaking the rear of the Russian military, as New Sky puts it. Putin wants Ukraine to know that its civilians aren't safe. Ukraine is letting Putin know that the same goes for Belgorod and the soldiers that the region serves via logistical hubs. HIMARS has proven itself to be one of Ukraine's most effective weapons for targeting Belgorod. But if Russia is to be believed, it may soon be about to bring a similar weapon to the war. January 25th also saw United 24 media report that Russia has deployed a supposed HIMARS killer to the battlefield named Sama. This multiple launch rocket system is meant to be Russia's answer to HIMARS, meaning it presumably delivers HIMARS-like capabilities to the Russian military. But there's a problem. Russia's best attempt at the HIMARS appears to be based on a 19-year-old prototype platform named the 9A524 Karma. That system never entered production, and it's unclear if Russia's supposed HIMARS killer is even up to the task of hitting a target. Never mind doing so as effectively as Ukraine's US-made weapon. Ukraine will be keeping an eye on Thesal to see if it can do what Russia claims, but in the meantime, revenge has been taken and Belgorod burns once again. Putin should have paid attention to Zelensky's September. Warning, there is a very good chance that what Ukraine achieved on January 25th was made possible by a year-long campaign conducted by the dangerous Alpha unit of the Security Service of Ukraine. In 2025 alone, that single unit inflicted $4 billion of damage to Russia's air defenses, carving out a series of safe aerial corridors for Ukraine's drones and missiles in the process. You can find out more about this amazing series of strikes in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show, the more coverage of Ukraine's attacks against Russia on its own turf. And thank you for watching.